Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church into the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Now, here's your host, Loren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today we're welcoming Carol Howard to the show. Reverend Carol Howard is the award-winning author of several books, including Wounded Pastors, Navigating Burnout, Finding Healing and Discerning the Future of Your Ministry and Healing Spiritual Wounds, Reconnecting with a Loving God After Experiencing a Hurtful Church. Carol is a frequent contributor to books, websites, magazines, and journals. She was a regular columnist at the Christian Century, where her blog was hosted. She's a Presbyterian, PCUSA minister in a village church outside of New York City. Let's welcome Carol to the show. All right, welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. This is Loren Richmond Jr., and today I'm pleased to welcome Reverend Carol Howard to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, glad to have you. So just for our listeners today, I am recording from home with the kids home from spring break, so there may be some guest voices in the background. So I appreciate your patience and continue to listen through here as we have the conversation with Carol. But Carol, I appreciate your presence here. Anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you?
Well, no, not too much. I was trying to just think of something fascinating and interesting, but I don't know. I was always bad at that party game.
It's almost like exhausting, like trying to think about like, oh, what makes, that whole like, oh, what's so special about me for those kind of things, right?
Right. I could tell you like my favorite food. I don't know.
What is your favorite food? How about that?
Okay, I would say I like Italian food. It's good, So like lately I've been like my favorite food will change every day, but lately I've been really wanting some like lasagna. What about you? What's your favorite food?
Yeah, my 6-year-old
probably salmon the most.
My 6-year-old son is like obsessed right now with, Dad, what's your favorite food? He's always asking us that.
Yeah.
So, and he's like, my favorite food is chicken nuggets, like shocking for a 6-year-old, right?
Right.
So
what about you?
I think buffalo.
What's your favorite food?
Buffalo wings.
Oh, yeah.
Love a good buffalo wing. Not too crazy spicy, but a little kick is good. And like the messier, the better. Like to me, it's like more fun if I'm just come out looking like a toddler.
Yeah, I'm a vegetarian, but actually Buffalo Wild Wings has these cauliflower.
Yeah.
They're delicious.
Yeah.
They're so good. I love them.
And you can, if you're into the mess, you can probably get into the mess there too.
Oh yeah, completely. They put all the same spices and rubs on them. It's great.
All right. Well, this is not a food podcast, so we'll keep going there.
Okay.
Share, if you would, kind of about your faith journey, what that's looked like in the past and what that looks like today.
Well, let's see. I grew up very, very conservative, fundamentalist Southern Baptist, the mean kind of Baptist.
Yeah.
I guess there's all kinds.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
I was with the mean kind. And so, which didn't work very well since I was like also called to ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't really believe in women ministers.
Yeah.
And so I always felt really bad about that. And I went to a fundamentalist Bible college and went to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. And it was difficult because, basically there were a lot of like homeschool kids or kids who went to international mission schools or whatever there.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of like a regular public school kid. So I didn't really know what it was going to be like and to live with all those rules and stuff. So I didn't I didn't do very well there. But thankfully, while I was there, I did meet somebody who encouraged me to join a mainline denomination and go to seminary. And so that was good. That was good. Philip Yancey was my Sunday school teacher
Wow.
there. So yeah. So there were a lot of good things that happened while I was there. And so now I'm a Presbyterian.
I can't remember if I told you this or another Moody graduate.
Yeah.
Growing up fundamental Baptist myself, like Moody, I always had like such an aura of like people who went to Moody were like the true holy people.
Oh, we are.
So
yeah.
I am just know that I am still impressed by your holiness.
If only you knew.
Spiritual practices that are meaningful for you, something you don't mind sharing.
Well, there are a lot. Probably journaling is the most, writing is the most. I'm learning to breathe, like use my breath a lot more, in stressful situations and things like that. So I wouldn't say that's my favorite at this point, but it's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly journaling.
Yeah. Well, this is all. We're already off to a good start, so I'm looking forward to our continued conversation here. So I had Carol brought her on the pod again to talk about her book and also kind of the topic of clergy health. So let's begin just kind of talking about clergy trends. And I know there's been some recent data released by the Hartford Institute about overall clergy health. Certainly, we're seeing a lot about clergy shortages. I was listening to, speaking of them, a Southern Baptist podcast, and I was kind of shocked just about how, the clergy shortage is everywhere.
Right.
Even in the Southern Baptist tradition, there's a real serious clergy shortage. So, like, I guess broadly speaking, what are your initial thoughts, or what have you been thinking about related to these trends and how they impact clergy?
Well, I guess it's not a surprise that there's a shortage. There's been a big transition. I know in our denomination, Presbyterian Church, which I think has some of the same sort of trends. They were asking for 3 years of a master's, which makes sense, and then you had to go to get a CPE, which I know people love that. And then you really, needed to do an internship, and a year-long internship was best. And, so you're like coming out of the place with 4 years of seminary debt.
Right.
And a lot of us were saying, we can't do this.
Right.
Like, we don't get paid. Like, you can't. And then we have a bunch of ordination exams on top of that. And so people would be stalling to get a job for, even longer, just to pass these ords. And it's not like the bar exam. We're not getting a big paycheck at the end of it. And so really the amount of money that we had to go into debt in order to get a salary that wasn't usually even up to the teacher salaries. It's not sustainable. And then so then when you start talking to college students who are really interested in the ministry, you kind of have to say, well, be careful. And even I'm going to be, there are seminaries who I did not pay any tuition at all, and which is incredible. But you still have to live, you still have to eat, and you still have to. So, so it's just really expensive, and so you had that sort of going on, and at the same time, there's a crisis of status. When people ask what you do, it's kind of embarrassing because like my daughter doesn't usually tell people that I'm a minister because she said it's not because I'm ashamed of who you are or what you do. She said what I'm worried about is what people think you are after saying it. And with so many scandals and so many horrible things that have gone on, people have this ideal that we are, we're all money grubbing, like terrible people. So there's this kind of crisis in status that's going along with this financial crisis, and then sort of nationally, there is, attendance is going down, and budgets are harder to keep up with, and buildings are getting older, and so we have this kind of trifecta happening, and so we walk into the church. And even though this has been going on for 50 years, they're kind of blaming it on the pastor who walks in yesterday. It's like, well, hey, you've been putting off this maintenance for a lot longer than since I've been here. And I don't want to, like, I just feel like I just piled on. There is also tremendous, wonderful things about being a minister too, which is why I'm still here. But I'm just answering the question.
Yeah, no, I am still pro pastor, but I think the real challenge is, I'd agree with everything you said there. Like, and I'm thinking as someone who, similarly to you, I think, of my 8 semesters in seminary, I think I only actually paid a dime, 3 or 5 of those seminaries, I can't even remember. So I didn't really necessarily come out with a lot of debt load per se. But I've thought about it otherwise in my more cynical moments that it's not necessarily even the debt or lack thereof. It's 4 years of my life that I might have gotten another degree or, advanced my career otherwise. Not to discount or diminish, I really appreciate the MDiv and what I learned there. But those are serious challenges. And especially when you think about, on top of, like you said, the institutional decline, the challenges of collapse in many ways, right? Of churches and denominations and institutions. I'm thinking about, as I referenced already, in that Harvard Institute study, there was a surprising amount of clergy who seemed to be doing quite well. And if I remember correctly, it was something about established clergy. I don't remember the exact numbers, but clergy who have been in the game, so to speak, a long time or a while, seem to be happier or more content than those who were early on in their career. So do you have any sense about what that might be about?
Yeah, I mean, or I can guess.
Yeah.
One thing is, if you bought your house a while ago, or if you're living in a manse, the housing issue, at least here I'm in New York City or outside of New York City. So the housing issue is a big one around here.
Yeah.
So, so that has a big determining factor. If you're trying to buy a house on a clergy salary right now, it's not, it's really difficult. And so there's, I think that, with the cost of housing going up so much, with also clergy salaries staying stagnant for so long, it's just not feasible for clergy. And then, so that's just one aspect. There is a lot of ageism when it comes to clergy, and that's difficult. I think another thing that's happening is there's this sense that, I serve a church that has been open since 1680.
Wow.
Yeah. So, a long time. And our churches have been, surviving for a long, long time. And yet, oftentimes we'll get, not we in particular, but clergy, we'll get like this business person that comes in and they're like, oh, I've been, doing my business for, 20 years, so I know better.
Right, right.
Or we'll start, we have just such a highly capitalistic society that we have this sense that, the business people can save us. And so I think that's kind of frustrating. So there's a lot of things, I believe, that are hitting particularly young clergy. Are many times are the age of our congregants are getting older, and so they don't quite always understand the challenges that young clergy are going through.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot that younger clergy have to deal with, I think. And the many times younger clergy not only have student loan debt from seminary, but they had additional debt from undergraduate that older clergy may not have. So it's a completely different financial situation. And the church hasn't dealt with that yet. In our denomination, the Presbyterian Church, they just this week.
I saw this. Yeah.
Yeah, there's, the internet's blowing up because they've just said that, clergy with families they came out with the how much they would need to be paying in insurance, and it's like 65% of our salaries are going to go to insurance. So clearly we just have not kept up, and so it's a real tragedy.
Yeah, I laugh about the age thing because, like, I guess I can say I feel like in mainline world, I was like too young. And then like now that I'm 40, 41, like in any other context, like I'm over the hill.
Yeah. It's really fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. Gosh. I feel like we could keep rolling on this like negative train for the whole episode. And I don't want this to be.
There are good things.
There are good things, but the challenges are for real. I saw a post from a pastor I know in Chicago, like Chicago, and he was saying that like some churches are thinking about turning their Sunday school classrooms into like apartments for their clergy, essentially, which makes sense because I don't know how in the world, like especially if you're talking like Chicago, New York. These big cities. I live in the Denver metro, and I interviewed recently for a church, and I don't want to say how much they're offering, but it's like, this is not anywhere near like a living wage of what you should be offering.
Right.
So the challenges are real. And I think we'd both agree, right? I was just talking to a denominational leader in my context yesterday, and he just kind of emphasized, like, since COVID, these trends have really kind of just been exacerbated.
Right, absolutely. And and not only have the budget challenges and also the attendance challenges, um, but also the housing and
Yeah,
inflation and everything's gone up. And so, when you listen to economists, they'll say, "Oh, well, the salaries have gone up right along
right.
with the inflation," and I'm like, "Oh, not for us." But I really believe, and I don't know, people deny this all the time, but we are sitting on like mountains of money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just mountains of money, yeah, all these pockets of money, and, people will say, "Oh, well, those are designated for certain things,"
Right.
yeah, okay, but somebody needs to start putting money into clergy and clergy housing and subsistence and, like, because we're not going to have churches if we don't have pastors, right?
Well,
We're just not.
I,
And I know everybody's like, "Oh, we need to rethink this
right.
and blah, blah, blah." But we can't starve our clergy and expect to have churches.
I
And
think,
I know, everybody wants to deny that's the truth, but it's
yeah,
the truth.
I think not the demographic, um, I think the dynamic that I worry about
Yeah.
is essentially what I feel like you probably seen in some contexts where just like, because the church is paying so little or offering basically next to nothing, like clergy kind of like undercut the market. Like
Uh-huh.
that, someone is like desperate to have a job or wants to be a pastor, so they'll go work for next to nothing, or like the church will essentially just hire someone, elevate someone out of their congregation. Which I don't want to discount that, because obviously folks can have ministry skills and giftings whether or not they have an MDiv, for instance, right?
Right. Right.
But it also does kind of like, using an economic term again, does kind of like depress the market.
Mhm.
So it can be a real challenge there.
Yeah, yeah, it can. And I think that goes back to I mean, in our system, this really weird thing was happening where we were expecting more and more, internships and
Mm-hmm.
CPE credits, and and it was costing more and more, but at the same time, we were growing these kind of robust lay pastor
Mm-hmm.
programs where and it's like, well, why would anybody become a trained minister if you could just be a lay
Right.
pastor and
Right.
not have to go through the same sort of hoops and the same sort of, which is fine if that's a strategic
Right.
plan, but it seemed like we had these two tracks going and we weren't talking to each other. And so now our seminaries are emptying out, and we just don't always have, and I'm 100% with you. Like, I train lay preachers and incredibly thankful for them. So I don't want to diminish that. But do we want an educated clergy? And
Right.
if we do, we need to start putting our money and our resources um and our power behind that.
Yeah, because we're really advocating for those who are like jump on Carol and I, like we're really advocating for a both and situation. Like,
Right, right.
we want to advocate for, or we want to empower, laity and ministry and that sort of thing. But we also are trying to advocate for, like, hey, if we're going to say like ordained clergy matter, like let's put our money where our mouth is too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is important in this conversation is the idea of like controlling what we can control, right? And that's where I
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate family systems theory in, at least as I understand it. One of its most profound principles to me, at least, is like thinking about what can I control. So you obviously a good familiarity with that concept, and we're going to talk about here in a moment your book, which features a lot of family systems theory. But talk a little bit about your experience with family systems theory and how you think it can be a help to pastors and clergy. Especially as we think about all these challenges and dynamics we've been talking about.
Yeah. Well, I definitely am indebted to my friend James Fenimore, who co-authored the book, and he's a therapist. And it was interesting because I was writing this book way before I came to my present church, and he was writing a book as well. And James is a therapist with the Good Samaritan Center, or the Samaritan Center, and he works outside of our church. And so we were reflecting on the books that we were writing, and we decided to merge them. And so I learned a tremendous amount from James.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of what we went through with COVID really reflects family systems theories.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
so if you think of our churches not as individuals, but
Right.
as organizations,
Mm-hmm.
as these systems, you can start to see some patterns that are taking place. So there are many things like homeostasis, like, these systems, these organizations, they really like to maintain
Yep.
homeostasis. So, and we talk about it like a rubber band on the wrist. The harder you pull on that rubber band, when it snaps back, the harder it
Mm-hmm.
hurts, and the more it wants to come back to homeostasis, wants to go back to that shape and form it used to be. So what we had, and also when we have these systems, fear really
Yeah. Yep.
does, and anxiety does, something, it really stresses out the system. So oftentimes when you have fear and anxiety, you have a lot of polarization. You have people pitting against people. You have people cutting people off, people getting really angry and tense, people fleeing. You have the whole fight, flight, or flee
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Mm-hmm.
situation that happens. And so, here we were on this trajectory that, again, has been happening way before you became a minister, and even I became a minister.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, this decline. And and it had been going on for a while, and then COVID hits, and it accelerated church closings. It accelerated the fear, really, I
Yeah.
think, for a lot of congregations. And so when that anxiety sort of spiked, then all of these things began to happen. People began um, to resist any sort of change. They began to polarize. They began to fight with one another. Um, and so it's been a very difficult, even traumatic time, I
Mm-hmm.
think, for a lot of clergy. And everybody kind of assumed that as soon as we opened up, it would be fine.
Yeah.
Everything would
I
be
did.
go back to, yeah, I did too. Everything will be go
Yeah.
back to normal. And then you're like, oh, this is not normal. You
Yeah.
know? So so there is this just extreme challenges that we're going through, and there's not a lot of support, because then at the same time, we also have, you know, all of the other things
Right.
that
That we
that
talked
we
about.
mentioned
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, a lot of clergy are suffering right now. And, you know, the good thing about it is, well, there's no, I don't want to like slap a
Right.
happy face on top of it, but the reason why we called our book Wounded Pastors is because of that kind of Jungian theory that Henry Nouwen, Henri Nouwen, picked up so beautifully, um, that idea of wounded healers,
Mhm.
and, we're in this time of post-trauma,
Mhm.
and we can have some growth out of it. We will have some growth out of
Yeah.
it. It's just gonna take a while,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I think that's such an important point to speak about, and I want to talk more about that. But there's also some quotes here from the book I want to highlight just because they resonated with me, and so here, this one I shouldn't say highlight. This one I hated, but I know it's true. Uh, Church members will take as much of your energy, time, and work as they can. This is not because they're evil, but because they're human. And boy, oh boy, does that slap a lot of us pastors in the face, right? Uh, as much as I understand that and appreciate that quote, I also don't like it. So talk through that with me and for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I think, most of us who are clergy, or a lot of us as clergy, there you do have undeniably like some narcissistic,
Mm-hmm.
clergy out there, and
Right.
but I think a lot of clergy, like, we want to be servants. We want to serve the church. We want to give to the church. We want to love the church. We want to take up our cross daily. We have all these
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
images of servanthood. Um, but one of the issues that can come up with that is we end up, um, really hurting ourselves and hurting our families
Mm,
and all of that. And, we again live in a hyper capitalist society where people are trying to get as much productivity for as little amount of money as possible.
mm-hmm.
And people live in that world every single day. And so when they come to us, they want us to have as much productivity with as little amount as
Right.
money as possible. And again, it's not evil. It's just the way that our world is working right now. And so people, will end up, trying, whether they're trying to do the best for the church, or they're just in that mindset kind of constantly. It can happen. It can happen. Maybe I shouldn't have said it will happen, because there are some great churches
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah. That's a more.
But it can,
Yeah, it definitely can. So this other quote here, um, you write, "What happens if we don't forgive?" And I think, man, I've been there. I'll just confess, like I've been there, holding a grudge against, a congregant, a parishioner. You write, "What happens if we don't forgive? Unfortunately, not forgiving tethers us to bitterness and to the people who have hurt us. In extreme cases, a person might not just be a wounded pastor, but a wound collecting pastor. Such people never seek closure. Instead, they persist in seeing malice in innocent acts, looking for ways to be offended, and becoming ever more sensitive to slights."
Mm.
I think that's such a powerful quote, and I'll I'll bookend this here with something I read from another, not your same Presbyterian, but a Presbyterian who used to be in your neck of the woods, the late Tim Keller, who certainly I would hold some different theological principles then, but he said something that really resonated with me about like the importance of forgiveness, because if we don't forgive, then our actions are inspired by not for reconciliation, but retribution.
Mm.
So talk about forgiveness and how that can impact and why that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, forgiveness is hard. It's just a hard and tricky subject. I just read Kaya Oakes just wrote a book. I think it's called Sorry Not Sorry, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But one book that really impacted me was Desmond and Mofo Tutu's book. That's a father and daughter, Bishop Desmond Tutu wrote Fourfold Path of Forgiveness, called a Book of Forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just had this tremendous impact on my life. And of course, you know, they're talking about the Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa and these really extreme acts of heroic forgiveness. And, you know, they kind of explain over and over again that, you know, forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for you.
Yeah.
And then I was reading about wound collecting, which I thought was just sort of this fascinating idea. And it was a psychologist who was looking at he was kind of looking at terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
And then he began to look at like incels and look at different people. And he came up with this thing of like wound collectors. And we all know these people, not the terrorist kind, but you know, these people who like cannot let it go no matter what. And so they begin to hold grudges and, you know, more and more grudges, and then they begin to see things in people who don't mean to be even doing anything wrong.
Right.
And so it's just a trap we can get into and become miserable. So, you know, forgiveness is tricky, and we try to suss out like the different sorts of forgiveness, whether it's legal forgiveness or what, you know, forensic forgiveness, or whether it's theological forgiveness, or, you know, and so there's different types of forgiveness, but certainly for me personally, it's still something that's important to strive for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Oh, so another quote here, and again, I hate this quote, but I think it's important. You write, or you and James write, as we continue the process toward healing, we need to go back to our stories, reclaim our character in them, rewrite them, and find meaning through them. So I'll speak for myself here, Carol. Someone who, like you, grew up in a very conservative context, for me at least, I wouldn't say like accepted, but I really found a way to like make peace with like my past. Not in a way that like I necessarily appreciate everything that I was taught, but I have this weird appreciation. I don't know if that even makes sense.
Yeah.
For it, like, you know, like I have a King James's Bible that I just hold on to dearly, because it's so familiar and meaningful for me. Yet also, there's certainly this weird dissonance there. But talk more about that and what you mean by that quote.
Yeah, I mean, I had to do a similar thing. It was really interesting right after I left Moody. I know that I definitely kind of rejected everything, and I wouldn't even tell people where I went to school, or
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would try to hide it and that sort of thing. And then at some point, like, you have to sort of come back to it and embrace it and realize it's part of you,
Yeah.
even though, even though it doesn't, it's still part of you, right? And even if you reject it, even if you don't agree with it, it's a piece.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be missing unless you embrace it again. But you can't embrace it in the same way, right? So you have to begin to think about retelling that story. And the stories are incredibly powerful, and how we tell our stories, especially stories when we've been wounded.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, the way in which we tell our stories will inform our healing. Viktor Frankl,
Mm-hmm.
he wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and just such a powerful book. I go back to it. I feel like I read it every year, and learn something different from it every time. He's just amazing. But he talks about this, rewriting your story,
Mm-hmm.
and finding meaning um and doing that. And sometimes you can even do it. I was able to write books
Mm-hmm.
about things, and you sort of reflect back. I'm kind of hearing in my ear, there are so many womanist theologians who would say, I think, who would fight back on that, the idea of, like, trying to redeem suffering. Um, and I want to honor that, but I also I just want to talk from my personal experience,
Mm-hmm.
the sense of when I've gone through difficult issues, difficult problems, if I've been able to retell that story
Mm-hmm.
in a way in which I'm not a victim, but I'm a survivor,
Yeah.
and then a wounded healer.
Mm-hmm.
It can be extremely powerful, not only for the pastor, but for churches
Right.
and their
Right.
identity.
Right. Well, this is a great conversation, and for sake of time, let's leave it there. The name of the book is Wounded Pastors. Hopefully I have the right title here. Was it Navigating Burnout, Finding Healing, and Discerning the Future of Your Ministry? Is that right?
That's
okay,
correct.
good. I was like,
I had to look
I-
because I forget it too.
I hope the subtitle hasn't changed since I've seen it.
No.
Let's take a quick break and we'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Reverend Carol Howard. So thanks so much for this conversation. Again, want to recommend her book, Wounded Pastors, with James Fenimore. So check that out. Carol, I always tell folks you can take these questions seriously or not as you'd like to. But if you're Pope for a day, what might that day look like for you?
Oh, wow, that would be a good day. I mean, definitely, like, liquidate the assets, give the assets to victims of pedophilia, put those pedophiles in prison. I would definitely ordain women and, allow for LGBTQ marriage. Be a good day. I'm sure I could get it all done.
Feels like, speaking of like assets, I feel like the Catholic Church would have enough assets where they could fund clergy for quite a long time, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life?
Well, I did this. I would have said Meister Eckhart, just because he's been the person who has really um, been the most influential on my ministry, I think. But Julian of Norwich too. I just did a little tiny devotional on Julian of Norwich, and I wrote it during COVID, and it was so helpful.
Yeah.
Because she also wrote during the Black Plague, or went through, had her visions soon after. Anyways, super, super helpful. So I have probably Meister Eckhart. I'll stick with
Well, those are two good options.
Yeah.
What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I'm hoping that, I talked about post-traumatic growth, and I really believe that we are going to go through a spiritual deepening where we begin to understand God in a different way, where we begin to connect with creation in a different way. I mean, we definitely need to begin to think about our environment um, and the way in which we care for creation. So I see a lot of really interesting things coming up about that. So, I just believe that this is going to be a hard, very fruitful time where we begin to do a lot of correcting of what um, we've kind of veered off on the last, I don't know how many years. When church is all about, like, I don't know, worship wars, and whatever we've been talking about, making sure the gays are in their place,
Right.
and I mean, that's always it's the main thing we've been talking about for so many years. So we just need to do a lot of correcting, and I think we're going to. I think we're there, or we're in that crisis moment.
This leads into my final question. What do you hope then? Like, you've kind of spoken to it, like, maybe not what do you hope, like, what do you hope to see? What? Answer that question how you'd like to, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, even now, if you think about all the congregations in the world, the church at large is probably one of the largest landowners in globally. And um and if we begin to take that seriously, and we begin to care for our world, and then, if we begin to help our congregants do that, we could have this huge impact. If we can teach our children how to connect with nature, and they're going through this tremendous nature deficit disorder right now. So there are just so many things that we can do, particularly, I think, with the environment, and connecting with the environment in a new way. I think that's our big crisis that's coming up, and it may give us an opportunity to think outside of ourselves a little bit. Be good.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that was not my last question. My last question is actually, where can people find out about you and connect with you, get the book, all that?
Yeah, I think my Oh, there's a Wounded Pastors website.
Okay.
So you can look for that, I guess. I have a website, but it's sort of in transition right now. But I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, Carol Howard, So if you ever want to talk to me, we connected through Facebook, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. I'm easy to contact.
Well, I really appreciate the conversation, really appreciate the book. Hope it's helpful to other pastors like myself. So always leave folks with a word of peace. So may God's peace be with you.
Thank you. Also with you.
Amen.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Loren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.